Good morning. Good to be back with you all again. So yesterday, I tried to help you become more creative. This morning, I'm going to try to make you more productive. So how do we do this? We, again, only have 10 minutes together. Well, let's begin, perhaps, by acknowledging where we're at. Let's do an assessment. How many of you are busy? Hands up. Yeah. What about the trend, though? How many of you are busier this year than you were last year? Hands up. Interesting. What about the year before that? Right. Okay, so there's an observation, but there's also a trend. So that does beg the question, if busyness is ever escalating, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Now, some people say, well, it's a good thing, it helps me perform at my best. I need an element of, workload. But all too often, I think actually the opposite happens. People notice that they find it ever hard to prioritize, balancing short-term and long-term objectives, balancing their own needs with the needs of the people they're trying to serve. So prioritization becomes ever harder. Their capacity to focus is something they become ever more aware, that gets ever harder. I can't sustain my attention. I can't concentrate. The flip side of that is I can't switch off. Familiar terms? Right, so suddenly we can't sleep as well. We become ever more stressed. And then the problem compounds. And we respond as if the only solution is to do more of what you've already been doing, to work ever harder. And I think this is unsustainable. It's not working smart. So, productivity today, what we're going to try and do, what I'm going to try and facilitate, is not give you some tips necessarily, but to facilitate a mindset shift away from busyness and one step towards effectiveness. Away from working hard, that I'm not against, but I don't think it's strategic, and one step towards working smarter. And I think a more useful transition is to be slightly less reactive, slightly more self-directed. That's what I'm going to try and facilitate today, for you to become slightly more conscious, more deliberate, more self-directed with how you use this. Not your time necessarily, but your energy and your attention. How do I propose to do that? Well, there are three principles, perhaps, I want to reinforce or remind you of. The first one, we're going to cover prioritization. People struggle with this as much as anything else. So maybe a reassessment on what prioritization kind of means, perhaps. Then we're going to talk about energy. Again, we talk about managing time. You can't manage your time. What enables you to get more from your time is managing your energy. And then finally, focused attention, the one thing that we're all struggling with. If you can't focus, you're not much good to anyone. So let's begin at the beginning. Prioritization. How do you prioritize? All too often, it's what's urgent, what comes first. And I think this is a mistake. So I'm going to offer principles, like I say. Most of the work you'll have to do after the session, because we only have a few minutes together. I would argue that in order to prioritize effectively, you have to become more outcome-oriented. It kind of makes sense, but this shift away from busy to effective, another way of thinking about that, is away from task orientation towards outcome orientation. When you're trying to apply creativity and turn that into innovation, that's a critical reframe. So, tell me, how familiar are you with your goals? For me, there are three frames of reference you need to get greater clarity on. Number one, long-term. Whatever that means to you, your business, your team, what defines success down the long term? You get greater clarity on that, a number of things happen. Motivation, discipline becomes your ally, and you start to understand that deviating from the immediacy can work. You understand that actually if we have a long-term objectives, you can give yourself permission to test things, to try things, which innovation depends upon. Then year goals. Well, hopefully most of you are pretty clear on where you want to get to by the end of December, but how many of you can tell me the progress you're going to make by the end of quarter two? That shift, I would argue, is phenomenally powerful. We vastly overestimate what we can get done in 3 weeks. But we underestimate what we can get done in 3 months. This is where you begin with prioritization. You get clarity, what will define success. But then, the real trick, I think, is applying the 80-20 rule. Hands up if you've heard of the 80-20 rule, Pareto principle. Okay, so the story goes, Pareto was an Italian economist, and over 100 years ago, he noticed that in Italy, 80% of the land was owned by just 20% of the population. It's an observation about unequal distribution. The reason it's relevant when you're trying to work smarter and become ever more productive is 20% of what you do generates 80% of your results. Let that sink in. 20% of everything you do generates 80% of your return, your impact, your progress. Unfortunately, 80% of everything you do doesn't really matter very much. So the analysis that would put you in good stead is to do your own 80-20. What are the 20% of things that I do on a regular basis that are really important? What are they? Because unless you get clarity on that, it's very hard to prioritize. This is about understanding not all tasks are equal. So you do your 80-20 analysis, column A, column B. What are the things that sit in column A, your most valuable tasks? Because although there are lots of roles here, lots of variants, I tend to notice the things that crop up are often quite similar. Strategic thinking, goal orientation, reviewing, planning. Improving systems, improving processes, building and nourishing relationships, developing your skills, yourself, and coaching others. All high-value stuff, and yet what's the one observation that you can apply to all of these tasks? They're never urgent. So we spend our life reacting, being busy, working on stuff that has very little consequence. How was your day? Busy. What did you achieve? I sent a lot of emails. How are your quarterly goals? I don't know, it's been quite a busy few months. I'll do that quarter 3. So again, this principle, I think, is critical. If you get back to this effective, busy, working hard, working smart, that's your split. Your most valuable task, your 20%, that is you being effective, it's you working smart, but it depends upon a self-directed relationship with how you spend your time. That's how you prioritize your work. So is that it? Is that the trick to working smarter? No, because you also now need to think about, all right, well, just because I know my valuable tasks, how can I use my brain in a more deliberate and active way to get them done quicker and better? And I think the important insights here is to understand that your mental performance is a factor of 2 variables, not 1. We speak about focus, we forget about energy. They're very different things. Let me try and demonstrate this. 4-digit number, 1752. Your challenge is to hold that number in your head, 1752, and in your head, add 1 to each number independently. So 1752 would become, keep going. And again. Right. When it's written up there, you can use your visual reinforcement. The minute it becomes a recall exercise, you're like, this is harder than it sounds like it should be. Why? Because it's an exercise in multitasking. Fine. But would you also acknowledge that that exercise took energy from you? If you did that for the rest of the day, you'd probably leave and you'd miss the next thing. But you'd use energy. Mental energy is much like physical energy. The point is, it's limited. It's a reserve. You use it up. So, if we now want to get better at using our brains at work, you master your energy and you master your attention, you're laughing. The best analogy is this. How many of you, when you were kids, used to use a magnifying glass and burn things with the sun? Great. 2 variables, not 1. If the sun is beating and you're focusing that energy, stuff burns. There's not a lot of point doing it when it's dark. And just because you're getting hot, if you're not doing this very well, nothing's going to happen. Put the 2 together, then you know what's going on. That's the best way to think about your brain at work. So tell me this, when is your mental energy each day at its peak? Most people, when I ask this question, agree that between 9 and 12 is when they're at their best. And yet what do you do with the first hour of your day? Email. Interesting decision. Imagine you've got a team of 3 people to whom you have to delegate all of your tasks. One of them's really amazing, hot, fantastic, sharp, competent, capable. One of them's not so hot, they get to work for you between 12 and 3, and the third person is maybe halfway between the two. It should affect to whom you give what tasks. And we forget to delegate to ourselves or our predictably oscillating brain with the same sort of rigor. The word predictable is operant here. You know what it's going to be like next week, so capture that. Own your first 3 hours. This might be easier to apply for some people than others. Obviously, shift work and the demands of your roles will make this harder to apply, but the principle is the same. Your energy is a variable. To what degree can you understand your natural biorhythms and then delegate to yourself based on those rhythms? And if there's one tip, start your day, the first 60 minutes, in a non-reactive state. That could transform everything. The other thing to be aware of is your brain, as you know, probably oscillates in roughly 90-minute cycles, so have more breaks. And when you have a break for longer. A large meta-analysis of time tracking software done last year, and it was office work, I suppose, but I think the principle is valid. The most productive 10% of employees worked for 52 minutes and then had a 17-minute break. 17 minutes, I don't have time for that, I'm too busy. No. That was the conditions that facilitated the greatest output. So, get better at prioritizing your tasks, get better at managing your energy, and the final piece has to be this. How distracted are you? Is it harder to focus this year than it was last year? And is there a trend going on there too? Because reliably the answer is yes. Our experience becomes ever more a relationship that we've built with our attention of continual, partial attention. It's continuous, and so can only ever be partial. One of the reasons we can't switch off is because we never really switch on. Some research says it takes your brain about 20 minutes to refocus. How many 20-minute chunks do you have each day when you are non-distracted? Not very many. So if I was to finish this talk with what I think are the biggest changes you can make, it's to become more aware of your attention, how you choose to spend it, and to what degree can you create the conditions where your brain can single task focus on one thing. And this isn't just a conversation of you at work. How many of you, hands up, find yourself watching TV or a movie, but you've got your phone in your hand? Come on, be honest. What's that about? Would you do the same thing with a book, but it's not very compelling, so you're flicking through a magazine at the same time? Because from your brain's perspective, it's exactly the same thing. We find it hard to focus, and yet you spend your time training your brain to be distracted. And the brain, I'm afraid, starts to respond. So notifications, alerts, anything that is non-essential, get rid of them, turn them off. Start to cultivate a more healthy relationship with your tech, your smartphone. Check it less times a day. Try to create even small windows where your brain can remain non-distracted, and I guarantee not only will your productivity escalate, but I'd expect your happiness and your well-being will do too. So, final wrap-up before I hand over to my colleagues here. Get better at prioritizing. You do that through greater outcome orientation and applying the 80-20 rule. Not all tasks are equal. Don't be busy doing the wrong stuff. Then acknowledging that energy is a variable. Much like physical energy, your brain needs rest recovery time. Your brain's really good for about 3 hours. Protect those 3 hours as much as you can. And then finally, if you can't focus, you're not much good to yourself nor anyone else. Maybe to finish with Simone Weil, the French philosopher, she says, attention is the rarest and purest forms of generosity. So master your attention, be generous with your attention. Thank you very much.